Welcome back. I, along with my two lifelong friends, Ben and Eddie, embarked on a weekend hiking trip deep into the Pinecrest Forest. Avid hikers, we relished the sense of adventure, the raw, untamed wilderness, and the camaraderie we shared. Late one afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, a cry for help echoed through the forest. Alarmed, we sprang into action, following the sound, shouting reassurances that we were on our way. As we neared the source, the cries abruptly stopped. An unnerving silence fell over the forest. In the waning light, we spotted a figure hunched over a fallen log. As we approached, the figure abruptly turned towards us. The moment our flashlight beam hit it, it transformed. Its body twisted and contorted at inhuman speed into a grotesque, monstrous entity. In the ensuing chaos, Ben, always the bravest among us, lunged at the creature. "Run!" he screamed as he distracted it long enough for Eddie and me to escape. The last sight I had of Ben was him wrestling with the beast, a determined look on his face. We spent the rest of the night in terrified silence, navigating our way back through the dark, dense forest. Suddenly, about an hour into our slow hike back to civilization, we heard it. The agonizing cries for help in Ben's voice echoed around us. I looked over at Eddie, but he held a sharp finger over his mouth. He dared not speak a word, the cries for help sounding as if they were getting closer by the seconds. He shook his head. I understood instantly. Whatever. That was crying out for help. It wasn't Ben. The seconds felt like hours as we crouched down, barely breathing, until the cries for help started echoing away far enough for us to muster up the courage to begin our trek again. As the horrifying hours went by, each breaking branch, each rustle of the wind stopped us dead in our tracks, frozen in fear, horrified at the thought of it. Finally, upon reaching our cars, we rushed to the local authorities. But before we could recount our terrifying tale, I received a call from my wife. Her voice shook as she told me that Ben had returned somehow. He claimed he was lost in the woods, and that we had abandoned him, leaving him having to flag down the help of strangers to weave his way out of the woods. Eddie and I rushed to my home where Ben was supposed to be, but something about him seemed off. His voice, though familiar, had an unnatural tone. His movements were stiff, and his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Eddie, who had known Ben since childhood, noticed it too. As we discreetly questioned Ben, his answers came too slow, his laughter sounded too forced, and he couldn't recall shared memories. Our fear crystallized when Ben excused himself to use the bathroom, and we found the bandana Ben always wore, stained with blood, in his backpack. We realized with a rising horror that the creature had taken Ben's form. When Ben returned, we confronted him. In response, he laughed, a chilling, inhuman sound, before his body contorted and twisted back into the monstrous form of the Skinwalker. We barely managed to escape, barricading ourselves in a room as we called the authorities. When they arrived, they found no trace of the creature, only the wreckage of a fight and our testimonies. The memory of Ben's sacrifice and the uncanny impersonation by the Skinwalker haunted us. The once familiar Pinecrest Forest now housed an unspeakable horror, a chilling reminder of the night that transformed our lives forever. In the serene town of Echo Lake, Montana, I found the peacefulness I needed to complete my novel. This quaint, secluded town, nestled between the dense forest and a tranquil lake, had an insular community with a rich tapestry of local folklore and old-world charm. My next-door neighbor was an old woman named Martha, known for her eccentricities and captivating storytelling. Often she would sit on her porch, regaling us with tales of mythical creatures, her favorite being the Skinwalkers. Our peaceful routine was disrupted by the arrival of a man named Jonas, a charismatic outsider who claimed to be a research biologist interested in the local fauna. His sudden interest in Martha's tales of Skinwalkers, however, piqued my curiosity. Jonas seemed unusually intent on the tales, pressing Martha for more details, his eyes gleaming with an unplaceable fascination. Within a week, Jonas began exploring the forest alone at night. His obsession with the local tales seemed to escalate, and he was often seen whispering to himself, his gaze distant and preoccupied. Martha, meanwhile, became noticeably anxious. Her vibrant storytelling ceased, replaced by silence and an air of unease. She began watching Jonas intently, her old eyes clouded with worry. One day, Jonas disappeared. A frantic search ensued, but there was no sign of him anywhere. The town was stricken with worry, and a gloomy uncertainty hung in the air. A week after Jonas's disappearance, a stray dog wandered into town. It was a beautiful silver-gray husky with piercing blue eyes. I noticed Martha staring at the dog with a fearful recognition. The husky was eerie. It had a strange gait, its movements eerily human-like. It showed an uncanny understanding of human conversations, its head tilting in a knowing way, and there was an unsettling intelligence in its eyes. Most chilling was its eyes, which were remarkably similar to Jonas's. One evening I found Martha on her porch, staring at the dog with a horrified expression. Her hands trembled as she confessed her suspicion that the dog was Jonas, transformed into a skinwalker. She feared Jonas's persistent curiosity had invoked this dreadful fate. Martha believed the skinwalker had Jonas's memories, making it potentially dangerous. She warned me to stay away from it and not to disclose any personal information. Over the next few days, I watched the husky with a wary fascination. One night, as I was observing it, it looked up at me, its eyes reflecting the moonlight, and to my horror it whispered in Jonas's voice, "Do you believe in skinwalkers now?" Fear rippled through me, but I fought it down. I approached the dog, my heart pounding, and asked in a shaky voice, "Jonas?" The dog tilted its head, mimicking Jonas's old gesture, before rising onto its hind legs in a grotesque human-like stance. The dog, "No," Jonas snarled in a chillingly human voice. "The curiosity has its price." Just as the creature lunged at me, a gunshot echoed through the quiet night. Jonas the skinwalker screamed in pain, collapsing back on all fours and limping away into the forest. Martha emerged from the darkness, her old hands shaking, gripping a smoking gun. She had been watching the creature, preparing for the confrontation she knew would inevitably come. In the ensuing days, Echo Lake returned to its peaceful state. Martha and I, however, carried the scar of our encounter, a chilling reminder of the curiosity that invoked a dreadful transformation and the ancient horror hidden beneath our mundane world. We never spoke of the incident again, but the stray husky's eerie blue eyes haunted my dreams. Jonas's fate was a grim testament to the danger of meddling with forces beyond our understanding. In Echo Lake, the Skinwalker lore remained alive, not as a tale, but as a dreadful reality. I still remember that night. My skin prickles as I recall the horror, the feeling of my heart pounding in my chest, the raw, unfiltered terror, and perhaps the most dreadful part of all, the fact that it all happened 3 times. Here are my true encounters with skinwalkers. The first encounter happened on a chilly night in the Arizona desert. I had driven down a lonely highway, my headlights piercing the darkness. I noticed a figure at the side of the road. It was too big to be a coyote, but too hunched to be a man. Must be a trick of the shadows, I murmured to myself. But the uneasy feeling persisted. Suddenly, the creature darted towards my car. As it ran, it changed shape, morphing from a hunched figure into something tall and human-like. Its eyes, glowing in the headlights, were the most terrifying part. My heart hammered as I accelerated, but the creature kept pace. It wasn't until I passed over a river that it ceased its pursuit, melting back into the shadows. The desert was never the same for me after that night. The second encounter occurred years later, while I was hiking through the Utah wilderness. The day had been beautiful, the night calm, until an unnatural stillness fell over the forest. Every instinct screamed at me to run. I heard it before I saw it, a snarl that sent chills down my spine. Turning around, I found myself staring into eyes that held an eerie intelligence. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a wolf, it was something far more sinister. I didn't wait to see it change form. I ran until my lungs burned and my vision blurred. When I finally dared to look back, I was alone. But the howl that echoed through the trees was enough to send me packing, swearing never to return. The final encounter was the most horrifying. I was driving through Navajo territory late at night, alone and exhausted. Suddenly, the radio started blaring static. I tried to tune it, but the static only grew louder. It was then that I felt it, an unnatural coldness seeping into the car. In my rearview mirror, I saw it. A figure, barely illuminated by my taillights, changing shape, its eyes glinting with an unearthly light. It was gaining on me, its form fluid and terrifying. Panic seized me. I floored the accelerator, but the figure matched my speed effortlessly. Then an idea flashed into my mind. I remembered the river from the first encounter. I veered towards a bridge I knew was up ahead, praying I would reach it in time. The radio static intensified, the chilling cold deepened, and I heard a screech that seemed to shake my very soul. As my car tires hit the bridge, the static abruptly cut off, replaced by the soft strains of a country song. The cold dissipated, and in my rearview mirror the road was empty. But it wasn't over. In the silence that followed, a voice echoed, a whispery mimicry of my own, repeating the prayer I had been muttering to myself. I still shudder when I recall those encounters. The Skinwalkers have marked my life with fear and unease, and every time I find myself alone at night, I can't help but listen for a howl, a snarl, or a whisper in the wind. My advice? Stay far away from lonely roads, deep woods, and the dark mysteries they shelter. If you ever see eyes in the dark, glowing with a sinister light, or hear your voice whispered back to you on the wind, know this: you're not alone. And whatever you do, don't look back. For once you've met a Skinwalker, life never quite feels safe again. Every ending is but a new beginning in the realm of the strange and the unexplained. Subscribe to keep the stories breathing and the mysteries unraveling. Remember, the dark is just a curtain to the unseen, until we next cross paths again. Sleep well, if you dare.